I believe that's why I was having you teed up. No, we're doing the right one. We are doing um Chuck from the TV show Chuck
Okay.
and versus James Bond. So the Battle of the Spies this week. Question for you though, what
Mhm.
James Bond are we using? Most recent?
Ooh. Yeah, I think we should go. I think we should go Daniel Craig.
Daniel
And here's
Craig?
why. I feel like he is the most active Bond, and that's a big factor. We'll get into it, of course, but
Yeah.
that's going to end up being a big factor for me in this fight.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Chuck, um, a little background on that is Chuck is a spy. So Chuck was a regular man who worked at virtually a Best Buy. It's not a Best Buy in the show. And then through some crazy events, um, got a super well because his old friend Bryce was like a spy, and sent him virtually like a supercomputer file, and Chuck accidentally opened it, and all this information just like boom into his brain, and all of a sudden he was like the world's best spy. Like he could fight, he could do anything, he could like kill people. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
He could do all this stuff.
He can like look
Top of the
at
line
a
spy.
number or a person and then see how they're. He's
Recognize if
basically
he was
got
in
the
the database.
entire
Yeah,
yes
he's got the
CIA,
entire like
CS,
CIA database
CIA, yeah, FBI,
in his head,
all those NSA, all in his head.
in his head. Like all their like files and all like their training information. So like how to do everything. So he's got it all there. 007 James Bond on the other hand, I mean, obviously world class spy, probably referred to by a lot of people as the best spy,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I think this is going to be an interesting fight. I already have this is a predetermined pick in my head. I'd like to hear you get into your, weigh in your options here. What's the fight going to look like? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that I think I have already chosen who I think I know who's going to win this fight as well. But let's take a look at a couple things here. So for one thing, there's people who are familiar with both of these guys. Initially might be like, "What are you talking about?" Bond obviously because Chuck is a comedic character. You know, and but that's got nothing to do with his skill set. Like we see in the show,
I was going to say, I want to jump right into this with you. Go ahead.
we've
Keep
seen
going.
in the show that Chuck, he because he is not a trained spy technically, he does act sort of erratically in some situations that he gets into. Uh, but because he's got that supercomputer in his head, you know, there's a confidence that comes with that when information that he is so sure of comes in there. James Bond, of course, doesn't need a supercomputer to feel that type of confidence. James Bond is
He like
confident.
went through all that training. He does that. He
Yeah,
knows it
he's
because he knows
he's
it.
prepared for basically every situation. He's very collected in every situation. He can certainly handle himself. Uh, I guess some things that I'm really considering here are one, like Chuck, because of the Intersect, that supercomputer.
Oh yeah, the
Um,
intersect.
he does know everything, and he would certainly know everything about James Bond. Like, there's got to be files and files on James Bond that he would have access to. Even if he didn't,
See, and I didn't even think about that.
mhm,
But go ahead. Even if he didn't,
even if he didn't, the biggest, the, this is the biggest thing for me is that Chuck's fighting skills that he gets from the Intersect are bar none. It's like various types of martial arts, and James Bond, Daniel Craig's James Bond, the one that we're talking about, who again is the most active, I think, when it comes to fighting, because a lot of James Bond in the past is like, shooting and car chases and escaping things and that sort of deal. Daniel Craig has, I think, done more fighting than any other Bond, hand to hand wise. But his type of fighting is more like boxing, and it's a lot of defense, which could I mean, the best offense is good defense. Some people say, but when you're going up against Chuck, who's basically got ninja skills, that's sort of you know bare knuckle, like stoic,
Yeah,
very
it's yeah.
stiff way of fighting. I
It'd
don't
be
think
like
that's
showing up to an MMA fight virtually and only knowing how to box. No,
yes.
I
That's
get that.
yes.
So here's this is what I'll say based off what you just said. I think if you look at this like up front and you like if you look at Chuck as a person and you look at James Bond and like I would say like if you look at both of their abilities, but you look at Chuck as a person, I think you take James Bond because you have this false sense of like, oh, like it's Chuck, like he's like a nerdy, like unathletic. You know
Right.
what I mean?
How could he beat somebody that is
Yes.
so sure of himself?
But
This
and
is so care.
this is what I want to touch on. You kind of already like touched on it, but like I wanted to say it. I want to talk about it more. Um, you see in the show a lot of times where Chuck is in a situation and he's scared shitless, has no clue what to do, like freaking out, like just like throwing like tissues, you know what I mean? Like whatever he can get in his
Yeah.
way, trying to like back somebody up. And then all of a sudden he gets back against the wall, he's cornered, and the intersect kicks in. And he's not even himself anymore. He's you know what I mean?
Right.
He's a spy. He's murking people. He's fighting. He's solving shit. He's doing all this shit. So I think at the end of the day, even though a lot of times we debate and talk about like how like confidence is big in these fights, a lot of people are going to underestimate Chuck, and I don't think James Bond will. He would never do that.
Mm-mm.
But I think that no matter how out of it Chuck looks, like when that intersect kicks in, James Bond is going to have a hell of a time trying to fight Chuck off because yes, James Bond was trained to do all of the things that are in Chuck's head, but Chuck doesn't never had to be trained. He doesn't have to think about doing it. It just happens, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like a reflex. Like all of a sudden his brain kicks in.
Yeah. The intersect becomes, like you said, a reflex. It's instinctual in what it does.
So
I think. Well, go ahead. Keep going.
yeah, so I think that I'm not discrediting James Bond whatsoever. James Bond is a fantastic spy. But I think in the battle of him versus Chuck, like I think it's pretty clear in the show that like nobody can beat the intersect, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I.
And also, I mean, further down the line, there's periods of time where Chuck doesn't even have the intersect at the time, and he still eventually like begins to function like a spy. He's not as good at all the other shit, but like so somewhere in his mind, aside from the intersect, is a little bit of his own little special piece of spy inside of Chuck.
Well, we have to remember, spoiler alert for Chuck, that Chuck was selected to become a spy, and only because of Bryce Larson's interference did that not happen.
Oh yeah, because he cheated.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that.
So Chuck definitely does have something like he's definitely does have some spy in him because he was going to be a spy. He was selected for the program. Um, yeah, you kind of touched on this. I think it's an excellent point that a lot of time, something that I feel I bring up pretty often is that certain is the idea of like certain fighters coming in and being a kind of arrogant in their abilities, especially when they're trained to the level that James Bond is. However, I agree that James Bond certainly would not do that. But I think that he, in some ways, is a sort of a slave to his training. Like he can do all this great stuff, but just having to being a product of that type of service and that type of training just comes with a certain stiffness, right? A certain roboticism, a certain
Yeah, I
idea that
agree.
like this is the way that things like need to be done. And I think for just about any opponent, you can really benefit from that, but not when it comes to Chuck because Chuck is a
Because
wild
Chuck can
card
just
with
do
the brain
whatever.
of a supercomputer. Exactly. So
Yeah.
It's
I like
almost
that.
it's
I
almost
think I
like
think you're right.
a
I think against most other spies,
mhm.
against most other spy, I don't think there's a spy, honestly, that James. I think this. I don't know if there's a spy that James Bond loses to, besides Chuck.
Yeah, I don't think so. Even if you think about like female spies, sometimes female spies are like better.
Yeah, because
But James
they're
Bond has
sneaky.
dealt
Because like
with
they're unsuspecting. Yeah.
sure,
Yeah. No,
and
I
James
agree with
Bond
you.
has dealt with that a lot before, and they still haven't been able to beat him. So I would agree. But it's almost like Chuck. It's almost like there's a little. It's almost like Chuck is using steroids. It's almost like he's got some like a little performance enhancing
No,
drug
he's
with the
definitely. You
Intersect.
could definitely say that like it would be like almost cheating in a
Hmm.
sense, but it's not because it's
Chuck's such a
inside of him.
right because it's inside of Chuck.
Like, but and it wasn't like they like implanted his body with like shit to make him like
Hmm.
superhuman. He watched a video and just absorbed all that information instantly.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how he's so good at being a spy. So I think to lock in our answers, I think it sounds like we're on the same page. I'm going Chuck this week.
Yeah, there's just no way that Chuck loses, even against, which is crazy to say against James Bond, like the spy of
James
spies.
Bond.
But Chuck has proven himself time and time again, and that intersect, that it's almost like it's not exactly like James Bond versus the intersect. I want to make that very clear. That's a
No.
huge part of it, but but like we said, the fact that that database is inside of a guy like Chuck, that that's completely different than if the Intersect was inside another guy who's like James Bond, another great spy.
Yeah.
Like if it was James Bond versus James Bond with the Intersect, that's completely different than what we're talking
Yeah.
about, just
Yeah.
because of who it's in.
All right. Well, so make sure you guys vote on that on social media. Chuck is our winner right now.